This last Chicago Bears preseason game against the Cleveland Browns is going to feel the most like the regular season that we've seen so far, and it'll be a good test to see just how ready this Bears team and particularly this Bears offense is for Week 1.
You are Locked On Bears, your daily Chicago Bears podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
This is Locked On Bears, and I'm your host, Lorin Cox. I'm here to bring you your daily, in-depth Chicago Bears news and analysis. You can follow me on Twitter at CoxSports1. You can follow the podcast on Twitter at Locked On Bears. You can like Locked On Bears on Facebook. Join the Locked On Bears Facebook group for even more Bears talk. And make sure you hit that subscribe button on the Locked On Bears YouTube channel to keep up with all of our video podcasts as well. Thanks for making the Locked On Bears podcast your first listen each and every day. We here on the Locked On Podcast Network are your team every day. And on the show today, we preview this Bears-Browns preseason finale, a much bigger Bears-Browns matchup than the usual fourth preseason game matchup we're used to seeing with these two teams. This one's going to matter quite a bit more, not in terms of the final result, but in terms of the players we get to actually see on the field this time around. The Bears planning to play their starters for essentially the entire first half. And so we'll kind of go through some of the key things we should be watching for in this game, including Justin Fields and this Bears offense trying to actually get into a rhythm instead of the little sprinklings we've seen through the first two preseason games. We'll talk about some of the situational and complementary football dynamics that also go into playing a more full half of starting group football together. And we'll look then specifically at a few positions where these training camp battles have heated up, and this is really the last opportunity for these guys to prove why they belong either higher on the depth chart or on the 53-man roster at all. I think the big distinction for this preseason game versus the other two is how much more time we're going to get to have to see Justin Fields with the full starting offense and the things that having that more time allows them to do. Because through the first two preseason games, right, we saw, was it 2 or 3 drives in the first game, and it was only 1 or 2 drives in the second game. It was like 17 plays and 12 plays, something along those lines. Those were flashes, a few throws here, a few runs there, like a couple of things to really like from Justin Fields and some other plays where he was under pressure, et cetera, et cetera. But those 2 and 3 drive type of games and opportunities are not enough time to really let the whole offense settle in, right? It's like they're just getting started and just getting warmed up. You know, you script that first drive in the regular season and then you kind of open things up from there. But we've seen games where, like, yes, you can certainly start hot and teams will do that, but there's sort of this back and forth adjustment period as the game goes on, where you come out with your scripted drive in the first drive, and you got your the certain number of plays you're trying to get through in a certain way, and then maybe you can react a little bit to that, but then starters are out these first two preseason games. But in this game, you can say, okay, first drive we tried these runs and these passes, and here's how the defense defended those passes. So then when we get deeper into the first quarter and into the second quarter, you can sort of adjust off of that, right? You can say, okay, they were defending these routes this way, so then if we then try and run those routes, but with a different concept or with different type of protection, or you roll it out on that play, you could try and work off of that. Or in the ground game, they're defending this run this way, so then could we run play action off of that to respond to that? Or could we run the same type of run out of a different look to see if they'll defend it different ways? And you sort of build up the play calling and the scheme and the game plan over the course of the game. Not that the Bears are going to put together a full regular season game plan, matchup plan for this game, but I think you get some of the in-game dynamics by having this offense out there that you just wouldn't normally get from these first two preseason games. That Fields can attempt 10, 15, maybe even 20 passes in this whole first half. That okay, then he can start to really feel like maybe this offense can get into a rhythm. Or if they're not able to get into a rhythm, that's still an important measuring stick, right? It's figuring out how this offense can or can't, how well can this offense get into a rhythm in the first half? Can they start fast? And if they do start fast, then can they carry that? Can they control the clock? Can they control the game? If they don't start fast, if it's a 3 and out on the first drive or 2, do they have ways to jumpstart the offense? Can they get things going after a slow start? And the first 2 preseason games haven't given us the opportunity to see how the offense responds to the ebbs and flows of how a game goes on. You'd really like to see them be able to make halftime adjustments and then see how they play those halftime adjustments in the second half. That's probably asking a bit too much of your starters to play that long in a preseason contest. So we won't get to see the full regular season type offense experience that we can't fully judge, because they also won't be showing all their cards and running a fully game plan schemed up regime. So it's not like I want to make sure that we don't read too much into what we see in this game, but I do think we will get to see more from this Bears offense and be able to read a little bit more out of this Bears offense and Justin Fields and his progress and that chemistry with the receivers when they get a full first half to really implement a lot of the things they want to implement and adjust as the game goes on, knowing that they won't have the full pause of halftime to make the more major adjustments that you might expect in a regular season game. Even more specifically than just the broader aspect of, yes, more playing time means more to see and more time to sort of weave through what an offensive game flow might feel like. Getting to play all the way up till halftime will give the Bears some other different situations to play through that maybe we haven't quite seen up to this point in the preseason. We'll go through some of both the situational football moments that we want to see up close, and also the way that this defense and offense and special teams can all work together a little bit more broadly when you got the starting unit all out there together. Next on Locked On Bears. There's no shame in all of us being in positions sometimes in our life when maybe money's a little bit short. Maybe you're feeling a little bit paycheck to paycheck. You feel like you can't maybe fill up the gas tank all the way, or you're trying to just save wherever you can and you're stressed a little bit about bills. Don't worry, this is where our friends at Dave can help. Dave is the banking app that can help you get up to $500 instantly with extra cash. That's more money to fill your tank, buy that wedding gift for that wedding coming up, or catch up on bills. You can finally tackle those expenses that have been stressing you out without any hangups. There's no interest and there's no credit check needed. Millions of people have already downloaded the Dave app to get the financial relief they need with extra cash. So if you're in a pinch and need a little help, download the Dave app and think of it as a helping hand from future you. Download the Dave app from the App Store today. That's DAVE. Sign up for an extra cash account and get up to $500 instantly. For terms and conditions, go to dave.com/legal. Instant transfer fees apply. Banking provided by Evolve. Member FDIC. This second preseason game is going to give this Bears coaching staff a chance to see how their players react to certain in-game situations that you certainly practice, but you can't quite recreate the exact same feeling of it mattering a bit more in even an exhibition game situation against a real opponent. Of course, the big one is the 2-minute drive, right? Clock is ticking. You got to get the offense, or I guess the defense, but especially the offense, rolling quickly. Get up to the line of scrimmage, get the plays in, get the ball out, and keep things rolling with an actual clock and an actual half beating down on you. And in practice, right, you can pretend, you can throw 2 minutes on your practice clock and have the players, hustle down the field and try and get things you can run through sort of the mechanics of it, and it'll be good to practice those in a game, in an actual sort of preseason type environment. But I think there's a little bit something extra when it's a real opponent and there's a real definitive half and there's a real pressure to get points on the board before the half. And no, it's not the same exact pressure as a regular season game where those points really, really matter. And okay, do we get the ball at halftime or do we kick off at halftime? Do we need to get those points before we kick it off again at halftime? Or do we know that we're going to get the ball back at halftime? Can we settle for a field goal? Do we need to push this? What's the score, right? You can have this sort of fake simulated score and fake simulated situations at practice, but there's something a little bit extra about it when it's a real opponent in a real stadium on the road, we should say as well, that adds that slight discomfort to it, maybe a noise factor, trying to get, stadium communication down from the booth to the sideline to the quarterback to the players, as opposed to, at practice when the coaches are right there all on the sideline and the players can just run in and out and everyone's there and you're in shorts at your practice facility where you're very comfortable and as soon as this 2-minute drill, literally actual drill situation is up, practice continues, you go on to the next thing and it doesn't matter anymore. But when you sort of are in that live game experience, it carries extra weight. It doesn't carry in this preseason game against the Browns, it won't carry the full weight that a 2-minute drive in the regular season is going to carry. But I think it's a great way to see how they're going to function in this situation. It's not necessarily that the measuring stick needs to be, do they score a touchdown? Do they settle for a field goal or do they punt? That will be part of the process. And you, of course, want to see them score. Obviously on every drive, you want to see the Bears score, but especially in the 2-minute, right? You want to see them execute it with points at the end. But I think a lot of it will just be the functionality, how quickly do they get up to the line of scrimmage? They've been really pushing this hits principle idea of the hustle and intensity and turnovers, and I can never remember the S, but right, it's such a big part of what they do, and they're grading the players' game film on how much they hustle. So I want to see, if you're in under 2 minutes, you complete the pass, you're in no huddle. Do they get up to the line of scrimmage noticeably faster than we remember from the Matt Nagy era and previous regimes, and just compared to the Browns on the other side and every other team? Do you see that do you save 5 seconds here and there, over the course of the drive? You save a second on this play, a couple seconds on the next play of just guys getting up to the line of scrimmage and in position faster. Similar thing, the communication, right? Guys have to hustle to the line of scrimmage, but you also have to have the play call in and ready, whether you call 2 plays before the previous play, so you know that if this is a completed pass, we're going to hurry up and we know what our next play is going to be, so then there's nothing to call in from the sideline and you could just go right away again. Or if it's a situation where as soon as the ball is completed, headset turns on in the helmet, coach is talking to him, does Justin Fields get the offense at the line of scrimmage, get the call communicated quickly, and snap the ball quickly? Or do they get up to the line of scrimmage? He's trying to get it communicated. Receivers are still trying to figure out where they need to be. Maybe Fields has to signal somebody to move or go up to the offensive line and change the protection, right? Even if they hustle fast to the line of scrimmage, how quick will the 2-minute operation go? That's not just on the players. It is on the coaching staff, but that's all part of what you want to be able to work out in this preseason situation where it doesn't have to matter as much. They did it in the first 2 preseason games with Trevor Siemian and with some starting offensive linemen when Borum and Jenkins played a little bit longer, and some wide receivers like Velus Jones, who will be sort of with the starters. But it wasn't Justin Fields, and it certainly wasn't the full cast of the starting lineup. To be fair, we're probably not going to see the full cast of the starting lineup in that 2-minute drill. The Bears have indicated that some of their more experienced veteran guys likely won't play the entire first half. Fields will be out there. I'm sure a lot of the younger and newer wide receivers, Velus Jones, Equinemius St. Brown, etc., the young offensive linemen, maybe the young running backs, those guys will play the full first half, I'm sure. But does that take out, Cody Whitehair as a veteran? Does it take out Darnell Mooney as a guy that doesn't probably need to be in there all that much? David Montgomery, Cole Kmet, do those guys need to play the full first half? Probably not. But at least you're going to have the lion's share of your starting lineup and that operation for Justin Fields. And most notably, too, that if whatever veterans are missing, the guys that are going to be filling in with the starters are likely going to be rotational guys anyway that could get some time with the starters in a 2-minute drill type situation in the regular season, right? If Mooney's not out there and instead Tajay Sharp is in, well, if he's going to be your number 4 wide receiver this year, there might be times when he is on the field in the 2-minute drive. Or if Khalil Herbert's in for David Montgomery or one of your backup tight ends in for Cole Kmet, right? There will be plenty of situations where they're not a starter, but they're, of course, rotating in that time, and it's still valuable to have them working through that 2-minute drive situation. So I think that type of situational football, and then the defense being able to play off of that, make those key stops, play the field position game, working through when to punt, when to not, and how this Bears offense adjusts to when on the field, or where on the field they start with the ball. When they're starting backed up by their own end zone, or, if they punt it down, the defense makes a stop, the field position improves, and the play calls change a little bit more when you get inside the 40, and of course, then when you get inside the red zone. So I'm hoping to see a wide situation, a wide variety of situations that this Bears team can be in both offensively and defensively, so they can get these sort of like in-game practice reps for situations that will come up when they matter even more in the regular season. Beyond that, there's a number of key position battles that have one last opportunity to kind of show us what they can do and whether they belong on the 53-man roster or where on the depth chart they belong. We'll go into some of the biggest battles still left that we'll be watching for in this preseason game next on Locked On Bears. There's still time to get your regular season Bears bets in with our friends at BetOnline, the number one source for all of your sports betting needs. You can bet on the Bears line against the San Francisco 49ers. I think they're 6-point underdogs in that game. The Bears over-under for the win total this season is over-under 6.5 wins, plus their long shot odds to make the playoffs. You can bet on where you think they're going to finish in the NFC North rankings at the end of the year. And BetOnline has news and reviews for every league, not just football, but Major League Baseball, basketball futures, hockey futures, combat sports, soccer, tennis, esports, golf, you name it. BetOnline is your top online resource for sports wagering information, live in-game betting scores, you name it, they have you covered. Head on over to BetOnline today or use your mobile device to learn more about all the action happening today and through the rest of the year. BetOnline, where the game starts. When we're watching battles in this Bears preseason game, it has to start with the main true starting positions still up for grabs, right guard and right tackle. Right now, Larry Borom and Tevin Jenkins are your starters. That's not locked in, but it feels like it's a little bit their job to lose at this point. That Riley Reiff has been playing with the backups, even when healthy. He hasn't played in the preseason games, and I'm not sure to expect him to even play in this preseason game either, but it's a great opportunity for Larry Borom. If he can continue a certain level of consistency that he's shown so far, he could be on the fast track to being your week one starter at right tackle. And then, of course, pretty much the story of training camp, Tevin Jenkins working with the starters at right guard. It's a brand new position. He said yesterday in a press conference that he still feels like he's catching up on the basics, that he's got most of it down, but he hasn't reached the point of like intricacies because it's just a relatively new switch. I wish they would have made the switch with him much earlier and given him more time to run up with this. We sort of warned about this throughout the offseason that, hey, make your offensive line starting group as early as possible. Don't make last-minute position changes. Hasn't been last minute for Tevin, but it's definitely been later in the process than you'd like, considering they floated it out as a possibility in OTAs, but didn't actually have him do it at all until just like the last 2 weeks here. So it's been a thrown into the fire type situation for him, and he's done pretty darn well, all things considered, with everything he's been through at this point through training camp. You feel good about Michael Schofield and Riley Reiff then as high-quality veteran backups, that if you have to throw them in there, you know what you're going to get. And you're going to get some, maybe at times some inconsistency, but it's sort of a known commodity there, as opposed to the young guys being anywhere on the spectrum from really good to still making some rookie mistakes. And week in and week out, we'll kind of see what kind of consistency we can get from them when the hits start really happening in the regular season. Still want to see how it shakes out at the bottom of the wide receiver depth chart as well. Feels like right now, Tajay Sharp and Dante Pettis are kind of ahead of the pack of everyone else as the 5th and 6th wide receivers. We kind of went through those dynamics of the wide receiver depth chart and the rest of the big battles that we'll get to here on yesterday's podcast, going through a full 53-man roster prediction. And if you haven't seen it on the Locked On Bears YouTube channel, there's a nice visual aspect. Nice is too strong of a word. A rudimentary visual aspect to go through it. I kind of live was moving the names around on the depth chart visually on the screen while we talked through the 53-man roster. So go back and watch that or take a listen to that if you have not up to this point. But there's still time for guys like Isaiah Coulter, Simba Webster, Chris Finke, Kevin Shaw to try and prove that they belong over guys like Sharp and Pettis that have a bit more proven experience in the league. Not that they've been uber productive players that are therefore guaranteed some roster spot, but they do seem to be ahead in the opportunities that they're going to get offensively. But those 5th and 6th wide receiver spots also will need to be major special teams contributors. And that's where guys like Coulter and Webster and Finke and Shaw can have a chance to separate themselves a little bit more. Sharp has never been a special teams guy, and he just doesn't play special teams in the NFL. So there's room for one of these guys to impress so well on special teams to say, no, we have to keep this special teams player on our 53-man roster, as opposed to a player at another position who might be competing with them on special teams, like at cornerback, where still a lot up in the air because of the injury situation. And I'm really curious to see who's able to play and who's not at that spot, because we haven't seen Kindle Vildor through the preseason up to this point. Lamar Jackson has gotten the start on the outside, and I think impressed this coaching staff quite a bit in that action. He's been a starter at practice as well when Kindle Vildor has been out. So does he have a spot on this 53-man roster? We've seen that Tavon Young and Thomas Graham have been injured pretty much the whole time. A little bit of practicing, I think, maybe for Graham, but not much at all. So, if they're able to get back and play in a preseason game, that goes a long way for them to make the 53. Or if they're injured for the whole preseason and training camp, do they have a spot? They're both talented players, but they haven't been able to show anything up to this point. So I'm curious to see if those guys play, or if they don't, is that a chance for Duke Shelley to kind of re-cement a spot on the 53? Or some of the other younger guys at the position. Jalen Jones is the undrafted rookie free agent they seem to trust the most at that spot. Devontae Harris, a late-stage free agent they brought in, has been playing a lot on special teams. He could be a sneaky guy on the 53. And this game is another opportunity for special teams standouts there, and also, depending on who's healthy, more defensive opportunities to kind of show this coaching staff that, hey, you belong on this 53-man roster ahead of maybe a couple of more proven veteran-type players that just haven't been healthy and haven't been available to this Bears team. Similar conversation, I think, at the defensive line spots, where you got a guy like Trevon Coley, who was brought in as a late free agent from I think he was most recently with the Titans, but didn't play at all last season and was kind of a rotational guy for a couple years before that. He's trying to compete with a guy like Micah Treadway as a backup 3 technique. We've seen Mario Edwards hurt most of the time, but he could be that backup 3 technique and kick both of those guys off the roster. Mike Pennell competing in there for the nose tackle spot with Tonga and Angelo Blackson. Feels like there's not room for all those guys, but it's hard to kind of separate who's going to be on the 53 there versus not at all. Same with the backup linebackers. 3 quality young players all competing for maybe 2 spots, if that. Jack Sanborn from Wisconsin, the undrafted free agent. Great game against the Chiefs. Still played really well against the Seahawks as well. And I think he's playing himself into a roster spot because he's playing a lot of special teams. Caleb Johnson, the recent undrafted rookie free agent from last year, was on the roster last season as well and played a lot of special teams, so he could be in that spot as well. But they signed DeMarquise Gates from the USFL, leading tackler, I think, in the USFL, and had some sacks and really, really played well. And has had some good preseason games too, but can he jump those guys on this depth chart? I think it's wide open for those 3 guys to have one more chance to say, okay, can Sanborn do it 3 games in a row and really look like the guy that they just can't afford to try and stash on the practice squad because he's been so good on defense and he's a special teams contributor as well. So you can really look across this roster and find at almost every position. I think tight end and fullback are kind of the one spot where we know what the depth chart's going to look like. We know who's going to make the 53-man roster and who's not. And you can probably look at some of the backup offensive line spots, but the group as a whole, right? There's some spots on the offensive line we need to see. We need to see the receivers. Guess we know what's going on at the quarterback situation too. That's a little bit of a given, but the end of the bench of the defensive end position even has some stuff, and maybe safety too with Elijah Hicks, the 7th-round pick. If Dane Cruikshank is healthy, that's one of the big questions for me. The injured guys. Can any of them come back and play in this game? We've talked about a number of them, but it's been an empty preseason for a few different guys that supposedly don't have major injuries that are expected to keep them out any sort of long time. The Bears have just been cautious with guys that have been dealing with lingering things smartly, intelligently, understandably so. But it limits our ability to see what they can do and get a glimpse of how this coaching staff feels about these players. So it's going to be a lot to keep an eye on here. And then, of course, after the preseason game, the 53-man roster cut-down deadline is next Tuesday at 3 o'clock Central Time. So you can be sure we will be breaking down not only everything that we see in the preseason game on Monday's podcast, but then after the deadline on Tuesday, on Wednesday's podcast, we'll break down that initial 53-man roster, see if the Bears bring in any outside players as well. So I hope you'll hit that subscribe button to keep up with all of our daily, in-depth Chicago Bears news and analysis. Thanks for making the Locked On Bears podcast your first listen each and every day. The Locked On Podcast Network brings you your team every day. That includes your other Chicago sports. Locked On Bulls is killing it with off-season content. Locked On Cubs and Locked On White Sox are doing what they can with some interesting seasons for both of those teams. Locked On Blackhawks has you covered as well. We just added Locked On Northwestern Wildcats as well for your college sports. Already have Locked On Illini and so much more. So check out some of our other Locked On Podcast Network podcasts. Come back on Monday for Locked On Bears. And of course, come back for another opportunity to bear down.